Hello everybody, welcome to Retro Game Super Leagues. I'm Brian, also known as UK Jen Zoidberg, and if you're a regular viewer of this channel, then the chances are you may have already watched last week's re-review, which saw me replaying Ocean's Head Over Heels. For this Super League, we're going to be seeing how that game compares to other isometric adventure games that were available on the Amiga. This was quite a difficult list for me to compile, as I had to ultimately decide what was classed as an adventure game. In the end, I decided that anything that was turn-based was not going to be included, as those games deserve to be in a role-playing or strategy game Super League, which will be coming up at some point in the future. Basically, anything where you have direct control over the character on screen was fair game, and as always, I can only talk about the games that I have actually played. In total, I've got just 18 games to go through on this Super League, and as always, I'm going to be ranking them in one of these 5 categories: essential, recommended, good, poor, or rubbish. So without further ado, let's get on with it. So for the first game, we have Airball, which came out in 1989 from Microdeal. I can remember this being a game that I tried very hard to like back in the day when I originally played it, but the fact that the difficulty borders on unfair, it meant that I ultimately stopped trying. Playing it again for the purposes of this video, I can see that not a lot has actually changed. It's got some great ideas. The fact that you control something so delicate and have to keep it topped up with air is certainly unique, and the graphics and music are both good, but I think the gameplay feels too aimless and the collision detection is immensely frustrating. I don't think it's quite bad enough to go in the poor category though, so I'm going to stick this one in good. Next up we have Kadava from 1990, published by Imageworks and developed by the Bitmap Brothers. This is nowhere near as well known as other games from the Bitmap Brothers, and it's probably also the least accessible of all their games that were released on the Amiga. As far as the gameplay is concerned, I found it to be incredibly confusing, and I could never really understand what I was supposed to be doing. Picking up, selecting and using items is far more difficult than it should be, which overly complicates the controls. So ultimately it ends up being a bit of a disappointment, despite the expected graphical sheen that you get from a Bitmap Brothers game. Again, not quite good enough to be in the recommended and not quite bad enough to be in the poor, so this is going in the good, and it's definitely better than Airball. Next up we have Degeneration from 1992, published by Mindscape. If you ever needed proof that graphics aren't everything, you should play this game. By 1992 standards, the graphics are pretty basic, but the game itself is thoroughly engrossing and immensely playable. It's easily one of my favourite games on the Amiga. Everything has a great atmosphere, but best of all, it was one of the first games that I remember that did away with the idea of giving a player a number of lives. Allowing for an infinite number of retries made it great fun and gave the player freedom to experiment. So this one is going in the essential category. Next up we have Darkmere from 1993, developed by 0 Hour Software and published by Core Design. Now, I've got nothing against games that have lots of story and lore for the player to read on screen, but when that text scrolls past slowly on a loading screen, it's very easy to get bored of it. And reading is what you're going to be doing a lot of, as well, as you will be spending a lot of time in menus, examining items and talking to the various characters. It's a shame, as the actual visuals are excellent, and the game does a very good job of making the locations feel like they're lived in. So it's got a lot of depth to it. But it's not very accessible, and it's not really a game that I'm going to play too often, and I'm going to stick this below Kadava in the good category. Next up we have Escape from CITS, released in 1991 from Digital Magic Software. This was based on the popular board game at the time, and it's a game that reminded me a great deal of The Great Escape on the Spectrum. Although I never actually managed to escape from CITS, I did have great fun exploring and mapping the whole thing out. I even reproduced that map for a player's guide in Games X magazine. It has a great sense of discovery every time you find a new area of the prison that you've not been in before, and you can really feel the tension every time a guard spots you somewhere that you shouldn't be. I really enjoyed this one, and for me this one's going to go in the recommended category. Next up we have Head Over Heels, which finally came out on the Amiga in 1991. And even though it's little more than an 8-bit game with coloured in graphics, you can't disguise the fact that this is a stone cold classic. The level and puzzle design is immaculate. Gauging your jumps is surprisingly easy, and Bernie Drummond's already excellent graphics really pop in 32 colours. If I was to nitpick, there are moments where you can continually fall to your death, and the random movement of some of the enemies can be annoying, but they're minor faults in what's otherwise a really good game. This is going to go in the essential category, and I think I will put it just below Degeneration. Next up, we have Heimdall, from developer The Eighth Day and published by Core Design. It's a Viking-themed adventure with some really excellent presentation. I can remember the cartoon-style graphics really standing out when we first played it in 1991, and they still look fantastic all these years later. I think the Viking trials that open the game could have actually been their own multi-event party game, they're that good. And the exploration side of the game is a lot of fun. However, the choice of combat system that the developers came up with almost kills it completely. It stops it from being something that I can recommend. And this one's not going to go anywhere other than the good category. And I think I'm going to put this one above Darkmere. Next up, we have Heimdall 2, Into the Hall of Worlds. This came out 3 years later, also from the same developer, The Eighth Day, published by Core Design once again. It's more Norse-based adventuring, and this sequel has better graphics, better structure, and most importantly, better combat. It's a pretty unforgiving game though, as the enemies can be extremely tough in the early stages. It's not always obvious what you're supposed to be doing or what you can actually interact with, leading to a little bit of aimless wandering around. But it's still well worth playing, and it is a massive improvement on the first one. I'm going to stick this one in the recommended section, but I would rather play Escape from Colgate. Next up, we have The Immortal from Electronic Arts, published in 1990. This was designed by Will Harvey, who did the excellent conversion of Marble Madness, also for Electronic Arts. It's a dark dungeon-based adventure, and it's fondly remembered by many Amiga owners, but I must admit that it's one that completely passed me by back in the day. Having played it for the first time for the purposes of this list, it's undeniably impressive to look at, and it's got some surprisingly deep combat, which I wasn't expecting. I didn't like the fact that there were hidden traps all over the place that could kill me instantly, and I didn't find the manual to be much use when I was trying to work out what I was supposed to be doing. I'm going to stick this one at the top of the good category, above Kadava. Next up, we have Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, the action game, released in 1992. This one was developed by LucasArts themselves and published by US Gold. And because it had worked for The Last Crusade a couple of years earlier, LucasArts decided once again to make 2 games for the Fate of Atlantis. The adventure game, as we all know, is excellent, but this so-called action game was an absolute travesty. I guarantee that if you do play it, all you'll do is wander aimlessly around the casino that is the opening level, punch a few guards in the face, and marvel at just how bad the whole experience is. Basically, this has the honour of being the worst thing to ever feature Indiana Jones. Do not confuse it with the other game of the same name. And this one is going to go right down in the rubbish section. Next up, we have The Last Ninja 2, Back with a Vengeance. This was released in 1990 from System 3 with the Amiga conversion done by Consult Software. This is the part of the video where I'm going to lose a lot of people. The Last Ninja series on Commodore 64 has many fans and reviewed incredibly well on release. However, I've never really understood why. I find it almost impossible to control. Even just navigating the screen is an absolute pain. Worst of all, even though I read the manual, I still couldn't work out how to pick up and use items. And the graphics aren't even that good either. So I'm going to stick this one straight down in the rubbish section as well. Fortunately, it's slightly better than Indiana Jones. Next up, we have Last Ninja 3, which came out in 1991. And this one was developed by System 3 themselves. Yes, it's got better graphics than the previous game, but the controls are still just as horrible. It also loads directly into the game without a title screen, which would be fine, apart from the fact that there is an enemy who runs up and attacks you straight away without warning. Jumping over gaps is still a complete pain, and I still couldn't work out how to pick up anything. Better than the second one, but still not good. This one's also going to go in the rubbish category. Next up, we have Ninja Remix, which came out in 1990. Also from System 3, conversion done by Eclipse Software. And out of all the games in the Last Ninja trilogy, this is the one that's the least amount of a pain to play. Maybe that's because it's a remake of the first game, and therefore it eases the players in a little bit. It still features the same terrible control system though. Where's the fun in constantly dying because you were battling with the controls? Just don't bother with any of them as far as I'm concerned, but this one is slightly better than the other two, and I'm going to stick this one in the poor category. Next up we have Raffles, released in 1989 from The Edge, developed by Softtech International. This was originally released on 8-bit systems under the name Inside Outing, and it used the same game engine as a game called Fairlight that I remember being pretty decent. It sees you exploring a mansion, room by room, looking for hidden diamonds. I like how the game encourages you to experiment by allowing you to move practically every piece of furniture in the house, and you can spend ages moving things around just to try and access a door that's otherwise blocked. There's not an awful lot to it though, and the graphics are quite messy. I don't think this one has aged particularly well. I'm going to stick this one in the poor category as well, but it's definitely better than The Last Ninja. Next up we have Treasure Trap from Electronic Zoo and developer Doodlebug Designs. This one was also from 1989. For anyone who was a fan of a Spectrum game called Hydro Fool, this feels like a proper update to that one with some impressive graphics. The underwater setting makes this one feel a little bit different, even if it also contributes to what is the biggest issue that I have with the game, and that's the slow movement of the character. But then, as you are underwater, that's probably understandable. The puzzles aren't too taxing, and it features some enjoyable platforming, but it's never more than a pleasant distraction. I'm going to stick this one in the good category, but I don't think it's going to go towards the top. I think I would rather play this one than Airball, so I'm going to stick it down there. Next up we have Voodoo Nightmare, released in 1990 from Palace Software, developed by Zippo Games. An appealing central character has gone a long way to making this game that I remember quite fondly from the first time that I played it. There's a little hint of Zelda in the fact that you explore an overworld and then enter temples to solve puzzles inside them. Movement is very smooth and fast, and it's easy to handle. Some may find it a little bit too easy to get lost inside the temples, as every single room does look pretty much the same. There was a map that came in the manual, but it's not much help. It's still an enjoyable game though. I'm going to stick this one also in the good category. I'm going to put it above Treasure Trap. Next up we have Whiz, which came out in 1994 from developer and publisher Flare Software. This is a game that actually ended up being given away for free with the Amiga computer itself, and it's not hard to see why, as it certainly shows that the Amiga was capable of console-style graphics. It's a fast-moving platformer that's not a million miles away from Sonic 3D, but just like that game, the controls are a little bit too fiddly, but at least it supports a 2-button joypad, which does make things slightly easier. It manages to be quite good fun, but it's desperately in need of a password system, as starting from the beginning every time is pretty annoying, and that stops it from being one that I can wholeheartedly recommend. So this one's also going to go in the good category. I think I'd rather play this one than Darkmere, so I'm going to put it just below Heimdall. And for the final game, we have a game called Wreckers, which was released in 1990, published by Audiogenic, and it comes from developer Denton Designs, who were the same people that made both The Great Escape and Where Time Stood Still on the Spectrum. And they put all the expertise that they learned from making those two games into this atmospheric space adventure. In many ways, this plays like a modern-day roguelike, as each game sees you defending your space station from attack, and it seems to randomise where those attacks come from. Unfortunately, it lacks a little bit of focus, takes an age to get going, and is a little bit confusing, even if you do read the manual. Would it have been so difficult to put labels on the map? That would have helped a great deal. This one is not poor. This one's also going to go in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Darkmere as well. So there you have it. That's all 18 isometric adventure games that I've played on the Amiga. If you disagree with any of the positions that you see here, then please let me know in the comments. And don't forget to come back next Friday to see what game I'm going to be re-reviewing in the next video. Thank you for watching. Until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.